Welcome to Pick Up and Deliver, the podcast where I pick up my audio recorder as I step out for a walk and deliver an episode to you while I stroll around. I'm Brendan Riley. Well, good morning, listeners. It's a lovely day here in suburban Chicago. We've turned the corner into firm fall weather. I've got a stocking cap on and a light jacket. It is in the high 40s right now as I take my walk. It's a Friday, so I've got a long day of Zoom meetings and answering emails and grading stuff. So that's going to be a fun time. But before that, I'm talking to you, my good friends, for a nice little stroll. So I was looking back. I mentioned at the beginning of the year I had a project I was going to try to do maybe once a month or once every 2 months. And it's been about 8 weeks since I did this, maybe 7 weeks. So it's time for another look back. If this is your first time hearing this, I'd be surprised. It feels like our audience is pretty stable at this point. But if you're new, welcome. I'm Brendan. In a look back episode, what I'm doing is I'm going back to the years before I was doing the podcast and looking at the games that came out in that year and doing a sort of favorite games of that year. Generally, I filter for games I've played, which makes sense. It doesn't seem reasonable to declare a game one of my favorite games from that year if I haven't played it. But also for games I own. And generally I will do a list of my top 5 games from that year that I own, and then some number of games from that year that I own, and then some other games that I like from that year, and then a couple I'd like to try. As always though, as I'm looking back at 2014, the first thing I do is I disqualify any game that is in my top 50. Obviously, if games are in my top 50, they're going to be at the top of my favorite games from that year list. At least they ought to be, unless they're games I've only played since my last top 50, which I don't know if there are any on here that fit that category. There might be, maybe one. No, I don't even think that one. I don't think there are any games on here that from 2014 that I've played that I hadn't played 2 years ago. Anyway, so the 3 games that I'm eliminating from consideration for favorite games from 2014 are games that are already in my top 50. That's Orleans, which is currently at number 17 in my top 50. Dead of Winter, which is at 35, and Five Tribes, which is at 46, and is one of the few games in my top 50 that I don't own. So those 3 are eliminated. You can consider them positions 1, 2, and 3 in that order on my favorite games of 2014. So now I'll give you 10 more that I really like. The way that I do this survey is that I go on Board Game Geek and I do an advanced search. I look for games published between the time of 2014 and 2014. And I say, don't show me expansions. And then I click the things so that they are ordered in board game in rank, according to their Board Game Geek rank. And then I look through all the games in that list until I hit a game that is ranked number 10,000. And then my assumption is if a game is ranked higher than 10,000, it's probably not one of my top favorite games from that year. So this year I had roughly 45 games that went into consideration, and so I picked out 10 that I thought are worth talking about. The very first one is Roll for the Galaxy. It is a kind of dice version of Tom Lehman's more well-known Race for the Galaxy. Now, I like Roll for the Galaxy better. I love all the little dice. In the game, they released 2 different expansions for it. One of them I have and have played a little bit. And the other one I picked up because it was on clearance at Gen Con. And so even though the game was, I think, $80, the expansion was $80 new, I got it for $30, which was quite a deal. But I haven't tried anything from that one yet. So I will confess I haven't been keeping up on my Roll for the Galaxy delight, but I do like Roll for the Galaxy a lot. And it is, in fact, my favorite of the games from 2014 on this list. The next one is Onirim. Onirim from Shady Torby is a solo card game. I guess you can play it 2-player, but there's no reason to. There's plenty of good 2-player games. No reason to retrofit a 1-player game. I don't know if that sound is messing up my recording or not. We'll see. If you can hear some noise in the background, it is a wood chipper up the block, and so hopefully you can still hear me talking about Onirim. It's an interesting solo game where you have this deck of cards and you are a traveler in a dream world and you're trying to find these keys, and you deal out cards and you make decisions about which cards, it's a push your luck thing. And then there are a few cards that help or change things. The game comes with like 6 different modules that you can plug in that change how it plays a little bit, each one. Honorim it's great. I return to it every couple years. I'll pull it out and I'll play it for half a dozen plays or something, and it always suits. I always like to bring it with me when I'm traveling because it's an easy to play solo game and it's a lot of fun. So Honorim is my number 5, but number 2. I'm just gonna number the new one, so it's my number 2 2014 game. Next up is one I don't play it often, but I really like. This is the Castles of Mad King Ludwig. This game got a little bit of a boost recently because they did a new edition of it with fancy tiles and deluxe stuff. I did not buy that because I don't play it that often, and the copy I have works great, so I didn't see the point in reinvesting in that game. But I really do like the idea of all these weird, different shaped tiles, and you're building your castle, and you get points for which rooms you put where. And the really fun thing about it is the auction system. Players take turns being auctioneers. When you're doing the auctioning, you are doing that by laying out the tiles that are for sale in these predetermined price spots, but you get to decide which one goes to which spot. So, and then you get all the money that people use to buy it. So if you see a tile that somebody really wants, you can kind of keep them from getting it by putting it in the really expensive spot, or you can put it relatively low so they'll buy it and then you get the money. It's a great mechanism and it works excellently. The game runs a little bit long, but otherwise it's really fun. That's the Castles of Mad King Ludwig. It's from Bezier Games, and it's designed by the person who runs Bezier Games, whose name I'm blanking on right now. It'll come back to me, and when it is, I'll interject it. Next up, we have Lords of Ziddit. I would have been surprised to suggest that this game would find itself as high as it did, but I really enjoyed it when we played it. Lords of Ziddit is from the same design team that designed Seasons, and it takes place in the same world. But in the game, you are these traveling adventurers, and you're trying to raise your glory, raise your money, and something else. There's like 3 different things you're trying to achieve over the course of the game. And there's an order at the top of the board that shows what order those 3 different categories are going to be scored in. And the way the scoring works is that whichever those categories scores first, you all compare them, and whoever has the lowest value in that category is out of the game. Then you compare the second category. Whoever has the lowest value of that category is out of the game. And finally, of the people who are left, whoever has the highest value of the third category wins the game. So it's a really neat elimination system that forces you to kind of balance things, but you really only have to balance enough to not be last place in either of the first 2 scoring things. So fascinating, really interesting. I like it a lot. It's a programmed movement game with some kind of deterministic fighting. Excellent. Lords of Ziddit. Next up, we have a game I purchased during my early get as much Martin Wallace as I can phase, and I think this one pays off. This is Onward to Venus. Onward to Venus has a sort of remarkable gameplay setup where you have a series of discs that represent planets, and it takes place in a sort of steampunk Victorian space travel era where you are colonizing different planets and trying to gain resources from them. It's an area control and point scoring game with lots of really interesting events. It's a little chaotic and a lot of fun. Very thematic, really emblematic of the time that this took place during the Martin Wallace Tree Frog era, is what it was part of. So that is Onward to Venus. And next up we have Aquasphere. Aquasphere is a game I like very much. I did get rid of it ultimately because I only need so many heavy games, and this one wasn't getting played that much, and there are a lot of other games I like more. But from 2014, this one really fits the bill. I love the mix of different things you have to do in order to advance the science in your underwater laboratory. There are several different sort of levers you have to pull, and you get points for all of them. But like many Stefan Feld games, some of the things allow you to buy widgets that plug into your player board and give you advantages in other elements. It's got this great action selection mechanism where you have this sideboard with these tokens on it, and as your tokens move up the sideboard, you then activate your robots that are in your lab. There's, like a lot of these games, there's a lot of spinning plates to be managed, and it's a pretty good time. Sometimes when I think about this game, this is one of the ones that sort of borders on regret in terms of not having it, but then I just remember all the games that I like better that I haven't played as much, and I'm like, well, I should play those other games instead of regretting that I don't still own Aquasphere, even though I don't have time to play it either. but I did really enjoy it. And if I were at Game Club and someone was setting up and said, hey, Brendan, we're playing Aquasphere, you want to play? Absolutely, I do. So that's Aquasphere by Stefan Feld from Tasty Minstrel Games, I believe. Next up is Deep Sea Adventure. This is a game that makes a regular appearance here on the pod as I talk about it and play it relatively frequently. The first several times I played it, I did not own a copy. My design partner and friend Rob has a copy and would often feature it. It was a regular game that we used during our online game nights during the COVID pandemic, and it works really well visually over Zoom. And so from that perspective, I recommend it. And it's a really tight push your luck game. I like it a lot, and it's well worth checking out if you get a chance. That's Deep Sea Adventure. I do own a copy myself and play it occasionally. Next up is a game that I imagine is not appearing on anyone else's top 20 games from 2014 list because they're all dumb and don't have a copy. No, that's not nice. But this is a game that I backed on Kickstarter. It's called Strife: Legacy of the Eternals. And boy, do I like this game. In Strife, 2 players each start with a hand of 9 cards. These 9 cards have 9 different roles on them, and each role has 2 powers. It's got the action and then the legacy power. The way the game works is that you have a series of locations, and the players are battling for control of these locations over time. And when the game ends, the player who has the most points wins. You get points for having control of the locations. So that part sounds all fine and good. What makes the game really interesting is the actions and the legacy component, or I think it's legacy or legendary, the legendary component. So the way it works is on your first turn, you're going to play one of your cards, and your opponent plays one of their cards, and whichever number is higher activates first, and then the other number activates, and then that's the end of the turn. Then you are going to activate, then you're going to play another card, and your opponent will play another card. You do that at the same time simultaneously and reveal them. And now is where it gets interesting, because the player whose number is higher on this new card activates first, then the player on the other card activates, and then the player who has the higher numbered legendary card activates its legendary power, and then the other player does theirs as well. I could have that backwards. It's possible the legendary powers activate first. But the idea is, since each of the 9 cards has 2 different powers, and they're going to be using both, there's a ton of interaction between the cards, and a huge part of the game is figuring out what order you're going to play that and trying to anticipate which cards your opponent's going to play. Because it is a perfect information game. You both have the same 9 cards, and you both can play them in whatever order you like. So it's a really interesting game. The art is this cool kind of scratchy art. It's got a kind of fantasy bent that reminds me a little bit of Jacob Krzyzewski from the artist from Scythe. Not in the visuals, but not in the subjects, but in the style. And it also reminds me a little bit of the artist who did the new release of Avalon, or previously did The Bloody Inn. So that art style is really evocative, and then the locations have this kind of cool theme, and then it's all about the card play, baby. That's Strife: Legacy of the Eternals. They also published a second one called Strife: Smoke and Steam or something like that, and that one is also very good. You can even mix and match them as long as everybody has the same 9 cards to start, and it's a lot of fun. So I recommend that. Next up is Valley of the Kings. This is a small box deck building game with a really interesting mechanism by which you score points by burying cards, meaning that you have these awesome cards that you want to use, but if you don't bury them, they're not worth anything. I have not played the original Valley of the Kings version because I have the deluxe final edition that includes all the expansions and stuff, but Valley of the Kings is a 2014 game, so I'm going to call it that, and I really like it. So that's that pick. And finally, the last of my top 10 games from 2014 that aren't already in my top 50 is One Night Ultimate Werewolf. Now, this is a game that I will acknowledge is not a great game, but I consistently have fun with it, and it is a game that continues to return to the table for casual groups. My board game club at my college really enjoys it. The players, my family enjoys it when we get a chance to get it out. It is reliably fun for casual gamers, and I just have a good time playing it. I've gotten a lot of mileage out of my copy of One Night Ultimate Werewolf, and I'm happy to keep playing it. That's One Night Ultimate Werewolf. I have 3 games from honorable mention, games I really wanted to put in the list, but I just couldn't put them above the other choices that I had here. The first one is La Isla. This is a Stefan Feld game, which is still in my collection. I really like it. It's an area control game. You're putting these pieces out on this sort of magical island, and you're collecting tokens, and you're scoring points based on how many of different tokens that you have multiplied by some multiplier. It's a very mechanical game, but the theme is really neat. You're collecting these tokens related to these animals. And the action selection mechanism is awesome. You get 3 cards, and each card has a phase A, phase B, and phase D power. And on your turn, you're going to put one of each card in one of those phases. So there's constantly this really interesting choice of what is the combination of these 3 cards that I'm going to use to best maximize how the play comes out on the board. It's really interesting and well worth looking at if you get a chance to check it out. That's La Isla. Love it. Second honorable mention from 2014 is Mythotopia. This is a Martin Wallace deck builder, and some would say the best of the Martin Wallace deck builders, between A Few Acres of Snow and Mythotopia and A Handful of Stars. There are some people who really like Mythotopia as the top one there. I've only played it twice, and I thought it was really good. It was on my top 50 at one point. It has since dropped off just because I haven't gotten it back to the table, but I do really like it and I wanted to mention it here. The last one is one of the first Kickstarters that I did. I backed both of the expansions. I really like the idea of the game, but I haven't played it in forever. This is Heroes Wanted. On Heroes Wanted, you play a bunch of sort of bumbling third-tier superheroes who are trying to get into the news, and the mega team from town has disappeared. And so you're showing up trying to get headlines by making waves and capturing criminals. You're also allowed to fight each other, like so you can punch the other person, the other superheroes out of the way so that you can get the glory. It's got a really neat action selection mechanism with these cards. The heroes are this really fun sort of combination of different cards that allow you to be these sort of wacky superheroes, and it's a lot of fun. I haven't played it in years, but I really would like to at some point again play it. I do still have it. It keeps staying through multiple culls, so it is meaningful to me, and I would like to play it again sometime. That's Heroes Wanted. All right, so I'm going to buzz through just a couple other things. Some favorites from 2014 that I don't own, and a couple games from 2014 that I really, as I was looking through the list, I was, man, I want to play that. The first is favorites that I don't own. Alchemists is an excellent game. It's a sort of standard Euro with interesting action selection. Reminds me a little bit of Dungeon Lords in terms of the way the action selection works, but it has this neat component where you are trying to figure out how potions work, and you use an app to determine which potions do what. Really interesting, a little bit ahead of its time, great components, Alchemists. Next up is Legendary Alien. Legendary is, of course, the deck building series from Upper Deck, and Legendary is the narrative twist on it that they did that's focused on the 4 Alien movies. I really, really like this system. I think it's very thematic. The idea of like you get a face hugger on you and then you have a chest burster somewhere in your deck. When that comes up, it bursts out and kills you. Is really delightful. I mean, it's gross, but fits the theme very, very well. And I really like the challenges that you get when you play Alien or Legendary Alien. So check that out if you get a chance. Next up is Camel Up. Camel Up is maybe my favorite racing game. It's an interesting betting game where you have these camels that are moving around. You're betting on which camel is going to finish first. And the gimmick of the game is that when one camel lands on top of another, it's now riding it. And if the bottom camel has to move, any camels that are on top of it will move with it. So you get this nice sort of progression. And then you're betting on the outcome of the race. So Camel Up, check it out if you haven't played it. It's great. Or Camel Cup, if you're interested in the complicated graphic design history of the original edition. Next up is La Granja. This is the only game I'm mentioning here that I haven't actually played on the table. La Granja is it's a sort of standard market-focused multi-use cards game that has some really nice payoffs. It's one of those games that I played a bunch online, and I always was struggling a little bit with getting the system into my head, because when you're playing slowly asynchronously, it's very hard to keep track of some of those things. But it was still really interesting. I could tell why people like it so much, and was excited to play it when I got a chance. That's La Granja. I'd love to play it. That is one that I don't own that I think is fun. Next up, we've got Onitama. Onitama is an excellent 2-player abstract game sort of in the neighborhood of like light chess. In the game, you play competing, I don't know, Japanese warriors of some sort. Your goal is to wipe out the opponent's leader or get one of your pieces on the opponent's throne, and that's kind of the game. But the big twist is you have 2 or 3 cards in hand, I think 2, your opponent has 2, and there's 1 in the discard pile in the middle. And on your turn, you're gonna play 1 of your 2 cards that will let you move your piece, and then you put the card that you just played in the discard, and you take the card that was in the discard. So in other words, every time that you play a move, you are giving that move to your opponent for their next turn, or for the turn after the next. And that back and forth is really fascinating, makes the game great. So if you get a chance to play Onitama, don't slow down on that one. Finally, there are 3 games that I've heard about that I want to play, and I would say they escalate in terms of complexity and depth. The first one is Fields of Arle. This is a Uwe Rosenberg game that gets lots of love. It seems to drift in and out of print. I always get it confused with Ora et Labora, but frankly, any Uwe Rosenberg game that I hear about, I want to try, with the exception of Hengist. I've heard that is horrible. That said, I might even be willing to try that, just because, trying out a horrible Uwe Rosenberg game might be amusing. But I really do want to play Fields of Arle. Xia, Legends of a Drift System is a sort of really famous early sandbox space game that is sort of legendary for its wild stuff, and I would love to try that sometime. And finally, Kanban is an early Vital Lacerda game that gets a lot of love. They've more recently released a new edition of it called Kanban EV. I'd be happy to play that one as well, and I consider that the same game. But the original Kanban is the one that came out in 2014, and I sure would enjoy playing that. So what 2014 games do you have on your list that you wish I'd covered? Head over to Board Game Geek Guild 3269 and share your thoughts there. You can send me an email there as well, or a geek mail there as well, to wombat929, or you could send me an email at brendan@rattleboxgames.com. I look forward to hearing from you and learning what 2014 games you think are amazing, and I look forward to next time I talk with you. I hope that your next walk is as pleasant as mine was. Bye-bye.
Brought to you by Rattlebox Games.